All right, shout out and general topics video number 2. Um, so yeah, if anybody has suggestions on anything that you'd like me to talk about, I'm definitely all ears because I'm going to be doing these weekly general topics type videos. Uh, since I need to get a shout out in here for the patrons, and this will be an opportunity for me to discuss, well, whatever it is that you all would like me to discuss. So with that out of the way, first let's get the shout out, and I definitely appreciate everybody, even if you're not a patron, if you just watch, if you like, if you subscribe, it means a lot to me, and all of it helps the channel grow. But definitely thank you to the patrons because they definitely send a strong signal to me that this is content that is definitely worth investing in, and I definitely look forward to continue to investing in it. I don't see any reason why I won't anytime soon, and I definitely appreciate everybody who's supporting in any way, but especially the patrons. So thank you all. Thank you, all of the patrons. Thank you, Michael Patton. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Jeremy Elder. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Povilis Tomasauskas, Frederick LeMay, Tyler Smith, Jonas Sandiger, Alexei Sherbako, Brendan Hopgood, Trent Cross, Jeff Clark, Adam Boyd, Gabriel W., Rodrigo Tomazzi, Andrew Watts, Yuha La Genova, or La Denova, Brad Rispone. Yeah, and thank you, Brad Rispone, who's a new patron here. Definitely appreciate that you signed up. Yeah, so I'm gonna have two topics I'm gonna cover today. One's gonna be yeah, a user who just submitted who wanted a shout out and submitted a sorry, 1 second, and who submitted to a question. Yeah, so or rather a comment. So yeah, a shout out to Electronic Music Sounds. He's a he, or I'm assuming it's a he, just based on the comment that was left. But shout out to Electronic Music Sounds. They wanted a shout out, so definitely appreciate that you're watching, that you subscribed, and yeah, yeah, I know you're going through a tough time, and yeah, like I said, I kind of have some understanding. I think all of us, have experienced I mean, obviously, I don't necessarily know what it's like to have some of the physical, medical, whatever kind of issues that you're going through, and I definitely wish you all the best with those. I can only imagine, definitely that when you add that on top of these psychological type things, that can be way more challenging. But definitely the subject of betrayal definitely comes to mind. And I think all of us, like I said in my comment, I think if all of us have lived long enough, I think probably all of us will experience a feeling of betrayal from someone that we have felt close to. But it is something that does indeed get better with time. Yeah, and yeah, so I really just want to say that I think it's good to talk it over, especially like in the early stages of these types of things. Also, I mean, there might be kind of mixed and of course I'm saying this just as like a for entertainment values only. I mean, I'm just I'm just a magic card YouTuber at this point with just my observations. So don't take this as any type of advice. I'm not licensed. I'm not I'm not giving this as any type of psychological advice. You don't want to be taking psychological advice from somebody who's discussing magic cards. But that being said, just all I can say is that one thing that has helped me through difficulties that I've gone through in my life is, I mean, I guess a few things. One thing is actually just looking up on YouTube, I guess, the type of thing that I went through. I mean, I know like, without going into too much detail, like when I went through something in my life where I felt like where I suffered a lot because I had a strong feeling of betrayal. you know, I did look up online the type of thing I was dealing with, and it was quite astonishing that it seemed like this was something that a lot of people had gone through. And you know, I think that you know, for some people that could be helpful, knowing that they're not alone. Of course, you know, they're you got to be careful, because some people definitely interpret the things that happen in their life really the wrong way, and they use it to develop what you could call a victim mentality, which is not really what you want to be developing. And you know, I could go into more detail about that, but when I say victim mentality, I mean this mentality that like you don't have any control over your life. And see, and there's an interesting thing just I want to say quickly about that. You know, like the reality is that sometimes we are wronged in our life, and I think that it's actually probably unhealthy to completely suppress that and pretend like, you know, how can I say, to pretend like you have total control and like somehow it's your fault or something that certain bad things have happened to you. Because you know, if you believe you had total control over your life, then you know, I guess anything bad that happens to you is partially your fault, because you could have done something to prevent it. I mean, but of course we don't have total control over life, and I think it's I think it's probably unhealthy. But you know, again, I'm not a mental health therapist or anything, if you know, to think that like we have total control over everything. But I think of what I would say a victim mentality, I mean, that's kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum, thinking that like we have no control or virtually no control over our life, and that, you know, that's of course just not true, and that'll blind us to the opportunity to make real improvements, and so forth. But yeah, I think it's important to realize that that, you know, if you're going through something that's causing you a lot of suffering, you know that you're not alone. I guarantee you, for almost anything that you're going through, if you look into it, there's probably a good amount of people who have gone through something at least somewhat similar. So yeah, and of course everybody goes through things that are slightly different. So you know, obviously things that might be helpful might vary somewhat depending on what exactly happened, and of course just each individual person who's a different person in their own right. But yeah, I mean, I guess the second thing I can say is that, I mean, at least for me, um, when I've gone through, you know, and you know, obviously I still go through struggles, you know, like my life ain't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But when I've gone through, and when I still go through tough times, you know, I oddly enough, I like to think of or watch movies like for example, The Shawshank Redemption. Um, you know, I think that movie is actually kind of a it kind of gets better in a way the more kind of difficulties you've gone through in your life, because I mean, number one, it does, I think, kind of help put perspective on things, because obviously no matter how bad you think your life is, I mean, I think we can all agree that Andy Dufresne in The Shawshank Redemption probably had it worse than what most of us went through. And well, you know, I mean, obviously I'm sure some of us have gone to prison and have gone through some, you know, very intense difficulties. But yeah, you know, the story is really designed to be quite an exceptionally a story of quite an exceptional hardship that somebody has to endure. And you know, so it puts perspective on things, you know, because you know, who knows what we're called to endure in our life. And you know, people have definitely found the ability to dig deep into their soul to be able to overcome a lot of difficulties, even ones that are almost hard to imagine. But I think the other thing too, that's another takeaway, is that is that it's really, I think the movie is also kind of designed to speak to a lot of circumstances that we're going to, not you know, not just like the specific circumstances that like the Andy Dufresne character went through. I think it's I think it's essentially a message of like how the worst situations, you know, don't last forever, and there's always hope, you know, and maybe it circles back a little bit to the first thing I said, like, because I think that like I think the movie is kind of really about the Red character, because it's, you know, for those who haven't seen it, I mean, it's about a prisoner named Andy Dufresne, and it's about a another prisoner named who goes by the nickname Red, and I think the story is kind of really in a way about Red and about and about how the Andy Dufresne character affects Red and gives him hope and reason to go forward, because you know the Andy character goes through a lot of difficulties, but he never succumbs to it. He continues to have hope. Eventually, he is able to escape through an interesting. Well, you know, anyway, maybe that's a little bit of spoiler, but I mean, I think I don't know if you look at any of the promotional art, I think it's kind of obvious. I think the drama is more about how it happens, kind of, and rather than necessarily that it happens. But it's, you know, quite a remarkable story. But yeah, I think sometimes when if you are able to find out stories about things that have happened to other people that might be somewhat similar, it can be very helpful to have hope, you know, because if other people have been able to endure it and overcome, then there's always hope that, you know, you can as well. Anyway, maybe I've gone on this topic enough, but if it's interesting in hearing me discuss anything related or anything into more detail, like maybe I could perhaps go over more details about what exactly happened to me, although I'm a little bit not sure if I want to necessarily make my YouTube channel kind of like too personal at this point. But in any case, just curious if there's any interest at all. I mean, I'm sure all of us have our stories, but anyway, I wish you all the best, electronic music sounds. Life almost always, the worst that life throws on us will, you know, barring like truly exceptional circumstances, it will get better. The worst that life throws at us basically never lasts forever. So you know, Godspeed, and I wish you all the best. You know, definitely let me know. I mean, well, you know, you don't have to, but you know, I'm definitely hoping things get better, and I certainly wouldn't certainly if you wanted to let me know if things, you know, start getting better, definitely not opposed to it. But you know, obviously the main thing is to focus on yourself right now. So anyway, let's get on to the next topic, which I'm kind of wondering if maybe I should have started with this one. But yeah, so like obviously the main subject of the video, I mean the main Magic related general topic that I want to discuss this time, because it comes up a lot, and I figured I might as well just make a video that kind of once and for all, hopefully, maybe not once and for all, but hopefully at least puts to bed some of the main reasons why I think Hammer Bogardan is a good card in the Obosh, Obosh what is this? It used to be called Obosh Dragon Hammer, but I don't really play Dragon anymore, Dragon Race Channeler. So the Obosh Hammer archetype, which is what I like to call it. I guess it could just be Obosh, you know, mid-range, because not all of the variants that I see people sometimes customizing for themselves play Hammer Bogardan. Okay, so what is it that I like about Hammer Bogardan? So, you know, I think I finally realized the main thing that makes Hammer Bogardan really really do it for me, and one of the reasons why is because I played a list that didn't really abandon it completely, but essentially relegated it to much more minimal status. I started playing a wish-based deck, and if anybody wants to see my most recent foray into trying something new, I have 2 videos up so far, and I should have another video up by you know, by the end of the week. Probably it'll be early. Probably it'll be within the next few hours or so. But you know, probably probably no later than by the end of the day, Sunday. You know, which I think is when this video is going to go up. But I played a deck. I played Wish. You know, 3 mana. You may play a card that you own from outside the game. You know, which of course is limited to your sideboard in competitive games. I played Obosh Hammer with Wish, basically replacing Hammer Bogardan, and then a customized Wish board, and yeah, so obviously I played Hammer Bogardan as a one-of in the sideboard, because I was thinking, you know, maybe there really is something to this, because obviously Hammer Bogardan is, you know, it can be a little clunky, although surprisingly 3 mana for 3 damage sorcery speed is surprisingly not as deal-breakingly clunky as you might think. And that's one of the key things that I think does actually make it a pretty good card, at least for our archetype. And that's a key thing, because you cannot just jam Hammer Bogardan in any red deck you have and expect it's gonna be good. And a lot of decks, it's just gonna be 3 mana for 3 damage sorcery speed, and that's not gonna cut it, to say the least. But yeah, so basically the idea was I was gonna play Wish, and then I could wish for all sorts of things. Apparently you can wish for lands. You know, shout out to Junbomb, Twitter user, who suggested Wish, because, you know, wishing for lands can be nice sometimes to just up your land count. Plus, you know, you can also move 1 Fury from the main deck into the sideboard, and that can sometimes be very powerful, because it gives you kind of like main deck 7 Furies in a way, and Fury can be a very powerful effect, and you can also play it for free. So, meaning with Wish, you just pay 3 mana and then you just Fury, you know, right away. That alone actually piqued my interest, because, you know, without Fury, like, you know, Wish can just seem too clunky. But the fact that you can wish for Fury, that's like the one card that kind of makes spending 3 mana to cast a card from outside the game kind of seem worthwhile. So, you know, I promise I'm getting to the point about Hammer Bogardan. So I have been experimenting with that. But, you know, one of the main things that I actually, you know, and of course, you know, an assortment of other, you know, artifact hate, engineered explosives too. It's, you know, which we can play in the sideboard without disabling Obosh when you wish for it. One of Chalice in the sideboard too with that list. But see, one of the main things that I realized about that deck that I was missing a lot is, ironically, Hammer of Bogardan. And that got me thinking, you know, like, what is it about playing Hammer Bogardan in the main deck that made it feel so much more powerful than in the sideboard? Because you'd think if you play it in the sideboard in a wish board, and you never see it early when it's not at its best, I mean, you'd think it'd be better, right? But no, actually, it felt, I definitively found myself missing Hammer in the main deck, and it took me a little while to put my finger on it. But it was after like the 3rd league that I recorded, and I think I'm basically scrapping the 2nd league that I recorded, or at least it's kind of a Patreon only thing, because, you know, it's probably not the best recording that I did. Just wasn't in the best mood. But in any case, by the 3rd recording that I had, so the 2nd one probably that'll show up on YouTube at some point in the future, I realized, here's the thing that makes Hammer Bogardan distinctly good in our deck. Okay, so first of all, like, our deck is a unique deck in that it is mono red, but it's not mono red aggro by any stretch of the imagination. Our deck almost can never win on turn 4, let alone turn 3, like some burn or faster prowess variants can. Our deck is focused on basically dominating the mid-range, surviving the early game. And unlike a lot of other red decks, I mean, we can actually really compete, like, kind of grinding with the best of them, even really, really late in the game, with even some of the grindiest decks, like, you know, even all kinds of control decks and so forth. And that's where Hammer Bogardan really comes into play, because no other card can dominate the extremely late game, like the really, really late game, like Hammer Bogardan. So, the fact of the matter is that when we're a red-based deck that wants, you know, removal to be able to deal with creatures, that wants reach to be able to finish our opponents off, but is also not really going to be doing this, you know, incredibly quickly, you know, you have a recipe for Hammer Bogardan's Recursion actually having a very possible solid place in the deck, and indeed it does. Now, that's not to say that Hammer Bogardan will always really completely shine, and will always be like a critical card in the matchup. I mean, I can think of at least one matchup off the top of my head where Hammer Bogardan is really not really needed at all, and that's like Hammer Time. Because the reality is Hammer Time kind of runs out of steam pretty quickly if you can mop up the board enough. Particularly like if you're playing Blast Zone, for example, if you can go blast off a Blast Zone and deal with some Sigarda's Aids and some random hammers and Springleaf Drums or stuff laying around, you know, you can really kind of cripple their resources. And like, the reality is they don't really have a lot of like actual grind. I mean, they have a little bit in the form of Lurrus, but since we've got so much burn and even main deck Relic, which we usually end up taking out anyway, because them recurring one thing with Lurrus is usually not game breaking, and we can just kill Lurrus and that thing. But yeah, the reality is generally, you know, 3 mana for 3 damage sorcery speed, especially sorcery speed against Hammer Time, is not exactly the best and where you want to be. And there's other matchups like that too. I mean, you know, like a lot of combo-based matchups where you got to kill them really quick may not be at its best. You'd be surprised how often I leave Hammer in, though, against a lot of other decks. But Hammer Time is a good example of a deck where it's really not at its best. But see, at the end of the day, we are really in the business, because especially against like Jund, against Control, and I'd say Control I would rate as the archetype that Hammer Bogardan's at its best against. Yeah, and so Hammer Bogardan's at its best against Control. It's, you know, like medium good against mid-range, and it's, you know, and it's decent against aggro, and it's kind of useless against like combo. Well, I shouldn't say kind of. It's minimally useful. I say minimally because, I mean, obviously if you have Obosh, you can still like maybe turn 5 Obosh, turn 3 like double hammer for 12 damage, and, you know, plus attack with Obosh for 6, and I mean, you know, who's to argue with 18 damage? So like, even, you know, because the reality is, you know, Obosh always makes even kind of like suboptimal burn spells still very powerful. So Hammer Bogardan is never actually completely useless, especially if you're playing Obosh. But I would say definitely hard control. It's at its best. Mid range, second best. Aggro, you know, third best, and then fourth best combo. So yeah, because like basically against hard control, like the games do grind out, and this Hammer Bogardan really helps deal with the planeswalkers. You know, you can whittle the planeswalkers down. You can attack with some, finish them off with hammer. You know, recur them. You know, sometimes you can, you know, they even accrue some card advantage with the planeswalkers, but since you're never really losing the hammer, you can keep, you know, sometimes you can hammer away at the planeswalkers, and then once you do, sometimes you can just keep recurring the hammer, and then sometimes finish the control player off. But I do always recommend going after the planeswalkers first. But yeah, so I don't know what else to say other than if you see my my videos, especially against Control, definitely I think that's going to be the biggest showcase where Hammer Bogardan is at its best. So you know, but also against mid-range, you know, like especially in one of my more recent videos, if you're like a patron and you're seeing what a most recent video go on, I mean, like basically wishing for Hammer Bogardan with the wish package kind of almost just like wins the game on the spot, you know, when the game drags out a bit against like a Jund deck. Because, you know, at the end of the day, nothing really gives you something to do with an insane amount of mana, and like that kind of breaks a board stall, so to speak, like a burn spell that you can just keep recurring, you know, ad infinitum, and you can deal with all the Dragon Rage channelers, all the everything that they throw at you. And, you know, again, that doesn't come up all the time, but let me tell you, when you've got like 10 mana in play and you've got like absolutely nothing to do with it, you're really going to be missing Hammer Bogardan in that spot. And I found myself surprisingly missing Hammer Bogardan with the Wish package when, you know, when that happened. But here's the thing, and so let me get to the reason why I missed Hammer Bogardan in the main deck as opposed to wishing for it. Okay, I found myself ditching Wish a lot with Seasoned Pyromancer. And here's the thing: whenever I ditched Wish with Seasoned Pyromancer, I was not able to recur Hammer Bogardan because obviously the Wish hadn't transmuted into a Hammer Bogardan, and of course it would cost 6 mana to do so. And that's critical because, you know, and I guess kind of I kind of came to this like in a really roundabout way. So excuse me. Maybe in the future I'll try to like I'll try to have my points maybe written out a little bit more so it flows a little bit easier. But see, the number one reason why Hammer Bogardan is great in our deck is that we get to pitch it with Seasoned Pyromancer, and that gives us the ability to completely sidestep all of the clunk that the card offers while completely reaping the benefits of its late game potential. There are very few red decks that I'm aware of that are both interested in playing Seasoned Pyromancer and Hammer Bogardan, and that want that insane late game grind potential that Hammer Bogardan brings. But our deck is one of them, and that came up a lot, and that is the thing that makes Hammer Bogardan really good in the deck. Because if you ditch Hammer Bogardan, you get a 1/1 token from Seasoned Pyromancer, and that's true of any other red card. I mean, any other, you know, non-land card in the deck. But Hammer Bogardan, of course, is unique in that you can recur it when the game goes long. So when you ditch it, you don't really ditch it, you know. And that could be said for any kind of flashback type card, but I think it's fundamentally different with Hammer Bogardan, and it's something that, you know, may not be completely intuitive. But consider the difference between Hammer Bogardan and Firebolt. If you ditch Firebolt with Seasoned Pyromancer, you get one use out of it later in the game. At some point, and that's kind of good, and that's obviously better than if you ditched like any other card. But was the 0 mana 1/1 elemental token you got out of the deal from ditching it with Seasoned Pyromancer better than a 1 mana 2 mana burn spell? I don't know. Sure, you got a 5 mana 2 mana burn spell later in the game out of it, but the fact that it wasn't necessarily clearly better than the initial investment means that I think it's not quite as valuable. But consider that to Hammer Bogardan, compare that to Hammer Bogardan, because when you ditch Hammer Bogardan, you trade in a 3 mana sorcery 3 damage burn spell for a 0 mana 1/1 elemental token. And I say 0 mana because if you ditch the land card, you wouldn't get an elemental token. But basically, Seasoned Pyromancer gives you the option to pitch any non-land card, and that basically becomes a Memnite that isn't an artifact, and it's a red card. And yeah, I think so. Basically, you get to transmute the Hammer Bogardan into like a Memnite, but and obviously, like, is 3 mana 3 damage sorcery better than a Memnite? That's an interesting question actually, but I'll tell you what is better: a 0 mana 1/1 Memnite type creature that also gives you the ability to pay 5 and summon a burn spell out of your graveyard and continue to do that for the rest of the game. Because yeah, I mean, like I said, there's some matchups where you just really want that late game grind potential. And the fact that you can have access to that while just churning through your deck with Seasoned Pyromancer, it's really huge. But also, now that we're playing Fury, we can also sidestep it because, I mean, the problem, of course, with Fury, we have to exile it, so we don't get to recur it later in the game. But sometimes if you've got like multiple hammers, if you pitch it with Fury, that also kind of sidesteps a lot of its clunk, because yeah, like basically you just like say you've got 2 hammers in your hand and you use 1 on Fury, then basically it just helped cast Fury for free, and then you still got another one that you can recur later in the game. But sometimes you can just pitch a Hammer Bogardan, and one nice thing about playing 4 is a lot of times Hammer Bogardan is going to be a good pitch if you've got it in your hand early on. But if you only have like 2 in your deck, like suddenly Hammer Bogardan's not that great of a pitch as if it's in your hand, because the odds of you drawing the other one are pretty slim. But if you've got 4, the odds of you drawing 3 more throughout the game, not so slim. So you got pretty good odds of drawing another one. So I'm much more confident to pitch an early game Hammer Bogardan and sidestep the clunk, and then maybe I draw it later on when it's a lot less clunky. Yeah, maybe I didn't necessarily outline this as well as I could have, but I hope I get the point across, which is that and also, by the way, we're also playing Valakut Awakening again. That may or may not stay the same. Spikefield Hazard brings a lot to the table, but lately, and I did try Forgotten Cave a bit too, but lately I've really been liking Valakut Awakening. Just the ability, because the main thing is that if you're playing Chalice of the Void on the sideboard, it gives you the ability to cash in a lot of 1-drops, because sometimes you want to be playing Chalice of the Void on 1, like for example against Hammer Time, because you are going to be crippling more of their deck than you are yours. Because, like, I mean, sometimes, like, especially if you cut one of our 1-drops, we can end up only playing like 8 or 12 1-drops, if you cut like some 1-drops for Chalice. But that does mean you are going to be racking up some 1-drops in your hand as the game goes on. So the thing I've been liking about trying Valakut Awakening lately is that it gives us the ability to pitch the 1-drops that accumulated in our hand, in addition to like extra Blood Moons or other things that may not be useful, and then just cash them in for a bunch of cards. But yeah, and we can also, of course, cash in like extra hammers. And the cool thing also is, unlike Fury, they're not exiled; they're sent to the bottom. So you could even order it so that Hammer Bogardan ends up on top. So like if we churn through our deck twice with like Valakut Awakening, like say like draw 5, draw 4 or something, which oftentimes you're not going to be drawing that many. I mean, with 9 cards left in your library, that almost never happens. So maybe Valakut Awakening isn't the best example. Other than that, you can still reduce the clunk factor if you're already going to be shipping some cards. You can just ship a Hammer Bogardan 2 while you're at it, and again with 4 in your deck, a lot of times shipping an early game hammer isn't really gonna impact your odds of drawing another one that heavily. And we do want to draw like at least exactly 1 hammer throughout the entire game. We really want to have access to that late game grind potential. But yeah, the bottom line is that between Seasoned Pyromancer, Fury, and now Valakut Awakening that we're trying again, basically, our deck is both unique in that we have a demand for competing with extremely grindy decks, because we sure as heck aren't going underneath and blitzing a lot of these decks right out the gates, like say Mono Red Burn is, or Boros Burn is. So we're a unique deck in that we both demand that, you know, because we really have to like be able to compete with the extremely grindy decks late in the game. Otherwise, like, you know, it can be kind of hard to justify that early game speed that we give up, you know, from not playing like a prowessy kind of other variant of this deck. But yeah, like, we really want that late game grind. We really want to be able to essentially dominate most other mid-range decks and control decks, or at least be able to like compete with the grindiest of them for the most part. Not many other red decks really have that need or that want. Well, I mean, I guess any deck could want, but not all of them necessarily have that need, given this, you know, particularly mid-rangey aspect of this deck. And not all red decks also have the ability to be able to mitigate the clunkiness of Hammer Bogardan. Yeah, being able to like cash it in with Seasoned Pyromancer, just pitch an extra copy with Fury, ship an extra copy of Valakut Awakening. You know, not every deck is going to be able to to mitigate the clunkiness to the same extent our deck is. And then that just leads me to the last point, which is like, worst case scenario, Hammer Bogardan is just 3 mana for 3 damage before it also gets the recursion ability. And the fact that that's like the absolute worst that the card can be, because like, make no mistake, I really am kind of looking primarily to you know, to ship it with Seasoned Pyromancer early in the game, or just pitch it with Fury a lot of times. You know, sometimes ship it with Valakut Awakening, but I am mostly looking to ship it one way or the other early in the game, so that I can either recur it later in the game if I pitched it with Seasoned Pyromancer, or to just draw another copy later in the game naturally. You know, when it's going to be less clunky, like say if I shipped an early copy with Fury. So, like, you know, for the most part, I'm kind of looking I'm looking to do that with Hammer. I'm looking to kind of ship it early in the game, and then ideally draw it kind of you know, a bit later in the game. And yeah, so when I am since I have that kind of unique demand and aspect about Hammer Bogardan, not every red deck is going to have the same ability to ship it if I see it early, like our deck does. And just when you put all of this together and you realize that like most of the time we are actually, I would say the majority of the time, we're actually shipping it. We're actually able to ship it one way or the other early on, and pretty much sculpt it to the point where we either only recur it or only like start drawing it later in the game for the most part. It's actually very, very strong. It brings just a lot of that late game grind without really ever having to deal with most of that early game clunk. But the fact that it is at its worst case scenario, if for some reason we're just not, you know, drawing into the ways to ship it, especially for value with Seasoned Pyromancer, I mean, the fact that at its worst it's just 3 mana for 3 damage, you know, you could do a lot worse with a card. You know, if that's the absolute floor of the card, that's actually not that bad. But again, I stress that like, you're mainly looking, your ideal circumstances, you're looking to ditch the Hammer Bogardan with Seasoned Pyromancer. And the fact that at its worst case scenario, it's just 3 mana for 3 damage, and then you can recur it, it just really fits the needs of the deck so far, at least I found, to a T. And every other, I even tried recently, briefly playing Light Up the Stage in its place, and I'm just telling you, just no other card really does what this deck does. Like sometimes just late in the game, yeah, you'd think you just draw into what you need, but you end up with like 10 lands in play at a certain point and just nothing to do with the mana, and just Hammer Bogardan would just go nuts, like killing lots of creatures and going to face repeatedly if you had it. I found myself missing Hammer Bogardan basically every single different consideration, including Wish, which does allow me to wish for it later in the game. I found myself every single time I try to play a variant without Hammer Bogardan, I always inevitably end up missing it. And yeah, oh, and of course it can hit Planeswalkers, which I've already mentioned, and that's a big reason why I think it's very good. But yeah, so look, I think I've been going on for like over 30 minutes now. I think I've said my piece for the time being. I'd be happy to address other questions that people have about Hammer, but yeah, I just wanted to share that realization that I had, that basically our ability to ship it is extremely important to why we are experiencing a lot of success with Hammer Bogardan, and why this seems to be working in this particular variant of Obosh Red that we've been playing. But it doesn't necessarily work in, like, you know, other red decks, and it may not even necessarily work in other like this is probably not, you know, for example, at its best in like the mono red Obosh prowess type archetype, which is distinct, I think, from this new Obosh hammer mid-range type variant that we've kind of pivoted into, because yeah, again, that Obosh prowess variant is definitely it definitely has like a plan A of just winning quickly, and then a plan B of, like, you know, grinding out the rest. But it definitely doesn't need to have like a plan of completely out grinding if the game goes late. And it also gets completely kind of hindered by a 3-mana 3-damage sorcery like that. That just slows it down enormously. Like, it wants to be lava darting, it wants to be lighting up the stage, it wants to be playing lots of cheap spells to enable prowess, and like Hammer Bogardan just kind of doesn't really fit there nearly as well. So anyway, I hope you all like this. This might have been a somewhat rambling video, so I apologize for that if this has been a little bit hard to follow. But yeah, thank you all to all of my supporters. Thank you all to everybody who is a patron, everybody who watches, likes, comments, subscribes. I really appreciate it. And yeah, maybe I can try to make these a little more structured in the future, but I look forward to sharing my thoughts, and yeah, and also let me know if maybe you want maybe you'd like me to do something similar, just maybe a little more structured on the kind of topics that I've covered today. But the good news is I'm going to be doing something like this every week. At least that's the plan, unless the way I'm uploading changes. But since I feel like I need to add something else to my weekly shoutouts, let me know. And there's a world of possibilities for what I can discuss, and yeah, definitely appreciate any feedback I get. So thank you, everybody. Take care. I've talked long enough. I wish you all a great week. Take care.